one point to consider is that in the research to suggest that set pieces account for like 30 to 40% of the goals scored in elite football. So you look at the research, it tells you that 30-40% of the goals scored are in set pieces. But one area that they probably haven't looked at is the throw-in. Now, there's a really good research paper. I know as footballers, you sort of not really in the business of, and it's generalization, but you want to play necessarily research paper. There's a really good research paper. It's really interesting, and it was written by Stone, Smith, and Barry, and was first published in 2021. And it was really interesting because they looked at the undervalued. It's called the undervalued set piece analysis of soccer throw-ins during the English Premier League 2018-19. And sort of just, in brevity, according to Stone, Smith, and Barry, they suggest there were 16,154 throw-ins in friendly Premier League game matches during 2018-2019 that were analysed. Higher final league position was correlated to increased throw-in, first contact success, possession retention. 83% of throw-ins resulted in a successful first contact, 54% result in possession being retained, and 8% of throw-ins led to a shot at goal from possession achieved after successful first contact. You get a chance to read that. It's a really interesting paper. But more to the point, the observation was that, according to Stone, Smith, and Barry, throw-ins that went backwards or laterally in direction resulted in increased first contact success, retaining possession, and shot creation. So the least efficient throw-ins was sort of forward and long, which is pretty interesting, really. But that's another story for another day, and that can sort of in terms of depending on your team setup going forward. But that's an interesting finding for me. But that's not what we're going to sort of go into detail this evening. But that's something to sort of think about, strategy, which is sort of key. Because you also can think of a defensive strategy. How do I defend to reduce the throw-in? What do I do? How do I set my team up? So this is for you coaches to sort of work on when you're sort of playing and, setting yourselves up and that sort of stuff. This is, the area of coaching. The area we're going to cover is the psychological aspect of preparing. But another interesting paper, we'll look at McKinley 218, and in Major League Soccer MLS between 2015 and 2019, 64,000 throw-ins were taken, and that resulted in an average of 44 throw-ins per game. So that's almost 5% of passes are throw-ins, guys. Okay, so this means, and we look at some other papers, which makes it interesting. We look at StatsBomb database for English Premier League during 2018-2019. You see, okay, well, generally you got 10 corner kicks compared to 44 throw-ins in a game. You look at the research suggests that there's about 25 to 35 free kicks, roughly 44 throw-ins. Here, this paper suggested Siegel, Lames, and Game. Siegel and Lame, 212, sort of showed, goal kicks as well. What's the approximate of goal kicks taken? Well, you're looking at maybe 17 goal kicks. And they're sort of, interesting statistics, really, when you think about, okay, and you look at, so this paper here, Stafford, Smith, and North, et al., you start to see the correlation and the significance of, like, team position in the league. So the throwing strategies, or what we want to focus on, is sort of, or twofold, really. Obviously, from a coaching perspective, to work on that, but from a psychological perspective, is obviously work on and rehearsing in our mind implementation. Is there a link between overall performance and throwing? Well, it looks like there is. And when you think, okay, in possession, defending, outcome of matches, they're sort of key factors we want to look at. So what we want to cover this evening, we're also going to in more detail shortly, is we're going to work on a couple of key points from a psychological skills perspective, how we can sort of obviously concentration from a psychological demand. We've got to concentrate and refocus it's an interruption in play. We want to like refocus our attention, get into position. We want to be able to rehearse mentally the next phase of play. Where I receive the ball laterally behind the ball, what's the next move? What's the third move? Where do we go from there? Defending that, depending on your position. So these are key factors, but you can also extend to that in terms of, okay, well, how do we defend the long throw? How do we do this, that, and the other? But that obviously we can touch on as we go along, but you can sort of see the significance of this area of the game that quite often sort of, and until recently, the last few years probably has been neglected. But we sort of see, you see some of the top teams, bringing in, so that the Liverpools of this world, bringing in throwing coaches and so on and so forth, because obviously everything counts. Every variable we can cover, everything that we can do to give ourselves the best possible chance of winning the game, getting the positive result is key. And the younger you start with this, the better it is, because obviously, you practice is sort of key. So what I want to do shortly is take you through exercises to rehearsal, concentration, focus exercises that you can do to sort of help you, but also, you've got to be clear with the coach in terms of what the strategy is, what we do. I'm saying, not just necessarily tactics. I'm saying, okay, well, what, have we got an idea in mind in terms of, okay, obviously you want to think quickly in the game. If there's an opportunity, there might be a player free, you might go long, whatever, but, have that flexibility to make that decision. But equally, like on the training field, having an idea of what you're going to do, receive the ball throw in, where you throw the ball into to the player, what height they're going to receive the ball to make it successful. Because you got to think, okay, you receive the ball off a throw in, there's immediate pressure on the receiver of the ball. Where can I throw the ball, at what height, so they can receive it comfortably and get into a position of space. These are key things, but in the mind of the receiver, they've got an idea that the first the first yard is in the head. Okay, where do I go going forward? So these are sort of key factors. So I'm going to sort of bring up an exercise that we can do shortly to help you with that, which is key. And then we'll sort of summarize and have a look at some sort of key points and go forward.